I'm Grace Chen, 58, and for 30 years, I've built my life around family, sacrificing my dreams, my comfort, even my identity to ensure my son had everything I never did. Last month, at my grandson's birthday party, my daughter-in-law Emma looked me straight in the eye and said, "Grace, your old Asian ways are embarrassing. You need to learn to fit in, or find somewhere else to live." The words hit me like a physical blow, especially coming from the woman I'd welcomed into our family, supported through graduate school, and helped raise my grandson. But Emma had no idea who she was really talking to. She didn't know about the real estate empire I'd quietly built over 2 decades, the investment accounts I'd never mentioned, or the fact that her dream house, the one she'd been obsessing over for months, had just gone up for sale. What happened next would teach her that respect isn't negotiable, and that sometimes the quietest person in the room holds all the power. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, this story is for you. 7 years ago, when David first brought Emma home for dinner, I thought I'd been blessed with the daughter I'd never had. She arrived at our modest apartment carrying a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, not knowing they're funeral flowers in Chinese culture. But the gesture touched my heart nonetheless. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore a simple blue dress that made her look younger than her 25 years. "Mrs. Chen," she said, bowing slightly in what she must have thought was an appropriate greeting. "Thank you so much for having me. David talks about you constantly." I found myself smiling despite the formal address. "Please, call me Grace, and you are very welcome here." David looked nervous, fidgeting with his keys. At 28, my son had dated plenty of women, but he'd never brought anyone home to meet me. The fact that he'd chosen to do so with Emma told me everything I needed to know about his feelings. "I hope you like Chinese food," I said, gesturing toward the kitchen, where I'd spent the entire day preparing his favorite dishes. "I made too much, as usual." Emma's eyes lit up. "I love Chinese food. Well, the kind from restaurants anyway. I've never had authentic home cooking." During dinner, she asked thoughtful questions about the dishes, complimented my cooking with genuine enthusiasm, and even attempted to use chopsticks despite clearly struggling with them. When she dropped a piece of Kung Pao chicken for the third time, she laughed at herself rather than getting frustrated. "I think I need more practice," she said, switching to a fork. "Maybe you could teach me sometime." The request warmed my heart. Here was a young woman who wasn't embarrassed by her lack of knowledge, who seemed genuinely interested in learning about our culture. David watched our interaction with obvious relief and happiness. After dinner, as I cleared the dishes, Emma insisted on helping despite my protests. In the kitchen, she rolled up her sleeves and began washing plates while I dried them. "David tells me you work at the bank," she said. "That must be interesting work." I nodded, not mentioning that my teller position was hardly glamorous. "And you are finishing your master's degree in marketing?" "Yes, I'm hoping to get into pharmaceutical sales afterward. The money is good, and I think I'd be good at it." She paused, then added, "I know David worries about providing for a family someday. I want him to know he won't have to carry that burden alone." The thoughtfulness of her words struck me. This wasn't a young woman looking for someone to take care of her. She was thinking about partnership, about building something together with my son. 6 months later, when Emma received her acceptance letter to the graduate program at Northwestern, she called me before she called David. Her voice bubbled with excitement as she shared the news, and I found myself crying happy tears for this girl who was becoming like a daughter to me. "The tuition is expensive, though," she admitted. "I'm not sure how I'll manage it." Without hesitation, I offered to help. I'd been saving money for years, living modestly, and putting aside every extra dollar. What was the point of having savings if not to invest in family? "You don't have to pay me back," I told her when she protested. "Education is the best investment. My parents taught me that." Emma cried when I handed her the check. She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe, whispering thank you over and over against my shoulder. That was the Emma I thought I knew, grateful, ambitious, respectful. The Emma who would later tell me my Asian ways were embarrassing seemed like a completely different person. But people change, I suppose. Success can change people in ways you never expect. Most people think wealth happens overnight, but for me, it began with a single moment of desperation and a leap of faith I never imagined I'd have the courage to take. I was 32 when I bought my first property, a rundown duplex in what was then considered the wrong side of Chicago. David was only 6, and I was working 3 jobs just to keep us afloat: bank teller during the day, cleaning offices at night, and translating documents on weekends for other immigrants who needed help navigating American bureaucracy. The duplex wasn't even on the market officially. I'd heard about it from Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman whose house I cleaned every Tuesday. Her nephew needed to sell his deceased father's property quickly to settle debts, and he was asking $18,000, a sum that might as well have been $1 million to me at the time. I had exactly $3,200 in savings, money I'd scraped together over 3 years by eating rice and vegetables for dinner, buying David's clothes from thrift stores, and walking everywhere instead of taking the bus. The idea of spending every penny I had on a crumbling building that needed thousands more in repairs seemed insane. But something in my gut told me this was my chance. I remember sitting at my tiny kitchen table that night, staring at the property deed I'd printed from the county website. The paper was thin and cheap, but the words on it represented something I'd never had in my life: stability, ownership, a piece of America that could truly be mine. My parents had lost everything twice in their lives, first during the war, then again when we immigrated and had to start over with nothing. They'd taught me that the only security in life comes from what you build yourself, with your own hands and your own sweat. I called the nephew the next morning, my hands shaking as I dialed. "I can give you $3,000 down," I said in English. I'd practiced all night. "I will pay the rest in payments." He laughed, actually laughed. "Lady, this is a cash deal. I've got 3 other people interested who can pay full price." I should have hung up then, should have accepted that some dreams are too big for people like me. Instead, I heard my mother's voice in my head, the words she'd whispered to me when we first arrived in America. "We survived losing everything. We can survive anything. What if I can get you all cash by Friday?" I asked. I spent the next 3 days doing something I'd sworn I'd never do. I asked for help. I called every person in our small Taiwanese community, explained my situation, and begged for loans. Mrs. Wong lent me $2,000 from her restaurant savings. Mr. Liu gave me $5, zero he'd been saving for his daughter's wedding. The Changs contributed $3,000 from their dry cleaning business. By Thursday night, I had $18,000 in cash wrapped in brown paper bags, hidden under my mattress. I didn't sleep that night, terrified that someone would break in and steal not just my dreams, but the trust and sacrifice of an entire community. Friday morning, I met the nephew at a coffee shop downtown. My hands were sweating as I slid the paper bags across the table. He counted the money twice, shook his head in amazement, and handed me the keys. "I got to admit, lady, I didn't think you'd pull it off," he said. "Hope you know what you're doing." I didn't. I had no idea what I was doing, but I learned. I spent my weekends scraping paint, fixing leaky faucets, and replacing broken windows. David helped, holding my tools and painting the lower sections of walls. We turned it into a game: who could remove the most wallpaper in an hour, who could sweep up the most debris. Within 6 months, I had both units rented. The rental income covered my loan payments to the community members, plus a small profit. More importantly, I had proof that the impossible could become possible with enough determination. That first property became the foundation of everything that followed. Over the next 25 years, I quietly acquired 17 more properties throughout Chicago. I learned about market trends, neighborhood development, and the art of negotiation. I reinvested every profit, lived modestly, and never spoke about my growing portfolio to anyone, not even David. The bank where I worked as a teller had no idea that the quiet Asian woman who processed their customers' deposits had become one of their most successful real estate investors. My neighbors didn't know that the single mother who hung laundry on the back porch owned half the buildings on their block. I kept my wealth hidden for David's sake. I wanted him to understand the value of hard work, to build his own character through struggle and achievement. I also knew that money can complicate relationships, create expectations, and resentments that destroy families. Most importantly, I was protecting us both from the judgment of others. People have assumptions about how immigrants should live, about what we deserve and don't deserve. Wealth makes those assumptions more complicated, more dangerous. The deed to that first duplex still sits in my safe deposit box, yellowed with age but precious beyond measure. It represents more than property ownership. It represents the moment I stopped being afraid of dreaming big. The moment I decided that being an immigrant woman didn't mean accepting limitations others placed on me. Now, as I plan my response to Emma's cruelty, I touch that deed like a talisman. It reminds me that I've overcome impossible odds before, and I can do it again. Tommy burst through the front door like a tiny hurricane, his backpack flying off his shoulders as he launched himself into my arms. At 6 years old, he was all knees and elbows and boundless energy. But when he hugged me, he became perfectly still, as if he knew instinctively that grandmothers needed gentle moments to recharge their souls. Nai, he shouted, using the Chinese word for paternal grandmother that I'd taught him, despite Emma's subtle discouragement. I learned something new at school today. This was our daily ritual. While Emma worked late at her pharmaceutical sales job and David stayed downtown for client dinners, I picked Tommy up from school and brought him home. We'd spend the afternoon together, him chattering about his day while I prepared dinner, both of us pretending we didn't notice how rarely his parents made it home before bedtime. Tell me everything, I said, settling him at the kitchen counter with a glass of milk and homemade cookies. But first, wash your hands. He scrambled down from the stool and ran to the sink. Still talking, we're learning about families in social studies, and Mrs. Peterson asked everyone to draw their family tree. Look, he pulled a crumpled paper from his backpack, smoothing it out on the counter. My heart squeezed as I looked at his artwork. There was David, labeled Daddy, drawn in blue crayon. Emma was Mommy, rendered in pink with carefully drawn yellow hair. And there, prominently placed right next to them, was a figure in purple crayon, labeled Nana, the most important person. Tommy, I whispered, my voice catching. This is beautiful. Mrs. Peterson said some kids don't have grandparents living with them, but I told her I'm lucky because you take care of me every day. She said that makes me very special. Children have a way of cutting straight to the truth that adults spend years avoiding. In his simple drawing, Tommy had captured what Emma increasingly resented: my central role in his life, the bond that geography and daily routine had created between us. What else did you learn today? I asked, hanging his masterpiece on the refrigerator, where it would join dozens of other drawings, certificates, and school photos. We're supposed to bring something special from our family's culture for show and tell next week. Can you help me think of something? I paused, thinking of Emma's recent comments about keeping cultural things private. But this was my grandson's education, his connection to his heritage. What about your great-grandfather's calligraphy brush? I could teach you to write your name in Chinese characters. Tommy's eyes lit up. Really? That would be so cool. None of the other kids know how to write Chinese. We spent the next hour at the kitchen table, my hand guiding his small fingers as we practiced forming the characters for his Chinese name: Chen, Tianming, brilliant heaven. He was a natural, his strokes confident and bold despite his age. "Why did great-grandfather use a brush instead of a pen?" he asked, dipping the brush in ink with the concentration of a master artist. "Because calligraphy is not just writing, it's meditation, art, and history all together. Each stroke carries the weight of thousands of years of culture. When you write with a brush, you connect with every person who came before you." Tommy nodded solemnly, as if he understood the magnitude of what I was sharing with him. "Can you teach me to write Mommy and Daddy's names too?" "Of course. But first, let me show you something special." I pulled out a small red envelope from my purse, a hongbao that I'd been saving for the right moment. Inside was a crisp $20 bill. "What's this for?" he asked, examining the envelope with its gold-embossed characters. "In Chinese culture, we give red envelopes to children to bring them luck and prosperity. This one is for you, for being such a good student today." Tommy carefully tucked the envelope into his backpack, then surprised me by wrapping his arms around my waist. "I love you, Nai. You're the best teacher ever." These were the moments that sustained me through Emma's increasingly cold treatment, through the subtle ways she tried to limit my time with Tommy, through the comments about my influence on him. My grandson saw me not as an embarrassing relic of old ways, but as a treasure trove of stories, traditions, and unconditional love. That evening, after David finally came home and took over bedtime duties, I found a small piece of paper tucked under my bedroom door. In Tommy's careful handwriting, it read, "Thank you for teaching me Chinese. I will practice every day. Love, your best student." Below the words, he'd drawn a picture of the two of us sitting at the kitchen table, brushes in hand, with a heart floating above our heads. I sat on my bed, holding that simple thank you note, and made a silent promise to my grandson. No matter what happened with Emma, no matter how ugly things became, I would fight to remain in his life. He deserved to know where he came from, to understand that his heritage was something to be proud of, not hidden away. Children remember the people who make them feel valued and loved. They remember the stories, the traditions, the patient hands that guide them through their first attempts at something new. Tommy would remember these afternoons at the kitchen table, and someday, when he was grown, he would understand why they mattered so much. The promotion letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, and by that evening, the entire dynamic of our household had shifted. David burst through the door waving the official letter from his architectural firm, his face bright with excitement I hadn't seen since Tommy's birth. "I got it," he announced, spinning Emma around the kitchen. "Senior partner, can you believe it?" Emma squealed with delight, and even I found myself clapping with genuine happiness. My son had worked so hard for this moment, staying late at the office, taking on extra projects, proving himself worthy of recognition in a competitive field. "This calls for celebration," Emma declared, already reaching for her phone. "I'm making reservations at Alinea. We're going to do this right. Mom, you'll come too, of course," David said, turning to include me in the excitement. But Emma's smile faltered slightly. "Actually, honey, I was thinking it might be nice if it was just the two of us tonight. Your mom can watch Tommy, and we can have a proper celebration dinner." The words stung, but I forced myself to smile. "Of course, you two should celebrate together. Tommy and I will order pizza and watch movies." As the weeks following David's promotion passed, I began to notice subtle changes in Emma's behavior. The success seemed to give her a confidence that manifested as increasing criticism of our living arrangements, my cooking, and what she now called my old-fashioned ways. "Grace, I appreciate that you like to help with Tommy," she said one afternoon as I folded his laundry. "But you really don't need to do everything for him. Children in America need to learn independence." I paused, a small T-shirt in my hands. "I don't mind helping. It's what grandmothers do. But that's just it in American families. Grandparents don't typically live with their adult children. It can create dependency issues. Her voice carried a new authority, as if David's promotion had somehow elevated her own status in the family hierarchy. The criticisms became more frequent and more pointed. When I prepared traditional Chinese dishes for dinner, Emma would wrinkle her nose and suggest we order something everyone can enjoy. When I spoke to Tommy in Mandarin, she would interrupt with, "English only in the house, please. We don't want him to get confused at school." One evening, as I was teaching Tommy to fold paper cranes, a skill my mother had taught me when I was his age, Emma appeared in the doorway with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What are you two doing?" she asked, though she could clearly see our project spread across the coffee table. "Nana is teaching me origami," Tommy said proudly, holding up a slightly lopsided crane. "She says if I fold 1,000 cranes, I can make a wish." Emma's laugh sounded forced. "That's a lovely story, sweetie, but we don't need to believe in old superstitions. Why don't you work on your math homework instead?" "But I already finished my homework," Tommy protested. "And this is fun." "Tommy, listen to your mother," Emma said firmly. Then, turning to me, she added, "Grace, I'd appreciate it if you'd check with me before starting these kinds of activities with Tommy. I want to make sure he's focusing on things that will actually help him succeed in school." The implication was clear. My cultural traditions were distractions, obstacles to Tommy's success, rather than enrichments of his understanding of the world. David, when he was home, seemed oblivious to these subtle power struggles. He was working longer hours, taking on bigger projects, networking with potential clients. His success brought him joy, but it also meant he was less present for the daily tensions building in our home. The breaking point came during a dinner party Emma organized to celebrate David's promotion. She'd invited his colleagues and their wives, transforming our modest home into what she called a proper entertaining space. For days beforehand, she rearranged furniture, bought new dishes, and planned an elaborate menu. "I'm thinking of hiring a caterer," she mentioned casually on the morning of the party. "You know, to make sure everything is sophisticated." "I could cook," I offered. "I make excellent dumplings, and my tea-smoked duck is always popular." Emma's expression tightened. "That's very sweet, Grace, but I think American food would be more appropriate for David's colleagues. We want to make the right impression." The right impression. As if my food, my culture, my very presence was somehow the wrong impression. That evening, I stayed in my room during the party, listening to the sounds of laughter and conversation drifting down the hallway. Emma had transformed into the perfect hostess, charming David's colleagues with stories about their future plans, their dream house, their vision of success. I heard her voice clearly when someone asked about family. "Oh, David's mother lives with us temporarily," she said with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "You know how it is with traditional families, but we're looking forward to having our own space soon, temporarily." After 3 years of sharing a home, of caring for her son, of supporting her dreams, I had become a temporary inconvenience in her narrative of success. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the dishes were cleaned, I found David's promotion letter lying on the kitchen counter. Looking at it, I felt proud of my son's achievement, but also a deep sadness about what that success was costing our family. Success, I had learned from my own journey, doesn't have to come at the expense of gratitude or humility. But for Emma, David's promotion seemed to be permission to reshape our family, according to her vision of what successful people should look like. She had forgotten that the woman she now found embarrassing was the same woman who had paid for her education, who had supported her dreams when she had nothing. Success has a way of rewriting history, making people forget who helped them climb the ladder they now stood on. Emma's obsession with 1247 Willowbrook Lane began on a rainy Saturday in April. She'd been scrolling through real estate listings on her laptop, as had become her weekend ritual, when she suddenly gasped and called David over to look at her screen. "This is it," she breathed. her voice filled with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious experiences. "This is our house." I was in the kitchen preparing lunch, but I could see them huddled together at the dining table, Emma pointing excitedly at whatever she'd found. David made appropriate interested noises, though I could hear the caution in his voice. "It's beautiful, Em. But look at the price. We're not quite ready for something in that range." "We will be," Emma said with absolute certainty. "With your promotion and my sales bonuses, we can make this work. We have to make this work for the next 3 weeks." The house became Emma's sole topic of conversation. She printed out the listing and hung it on the refrigerator, right over Tommy's artwork. She researched the neighborhood, memorized the school ratings, calculated commute times, and created elaborate spreadsheets showing how they could afford the mortgage payments. "Look at this kitchen," she would say to anyone who'd listen, showing them the glossy photos on her phone. 6-burner gas range, granite countertops, walk-in pantry, and the master suite has a fireplace and a balcony overlooking the garden. The house was undeniably beautiful, a Tudor-style home built in the 1920s, recently renovated with modern amenities while preserving its historical charm. It sat on nearly an acre in Willowbrook, one of Chicago's most exclusive suburbs, surrounded by mature oak trees and carefully maintained gardens. But it was also $2.8 million, approximately 4 times what David and Emma could reasonably afford, even with his promotion. "The market is so competitive right now," Emma complained after yet another weekend of driving by the property. 3 families have already looked at it, and the realtor says there might be a bidding war. She began treating the house as if it were already theirs, referring to our future kitchen and Tommy's new bedroom. She researched the best movers, looked up information about the local country club, and even started following the neighborhood's social media pages. David tried to be supportive while remaining realistic. "Maybe we should look at some other options," he suggested gently. "There are beautiful homes in our price range." But Emma was beyond reason. "This house is perfect for us," she insisted. "It's in the right neighborhood, the right school district. It's the kind of place where we belong. The kind of place where we belong." I wondered if we included me, or if this dream house was part of her vision of a life where I no longer existed. One evening, after Emma had spent another hour researching mortgage options and calculating down payments, I decided to do some research of my own. I waited until she and David had gone to bed, then pulled out my laptop and looked up the property listing. The house was even more beautiful than Emma's enthusiastic descriptions had conveyed. The listing photos showed sun-drenched rooms with high ceilings, a library with built-in bookcases, a chef's kitchen that could easily accommodate multiple cooks, and a master suite that looked like something from a luxury hotel. But what caught my attention wasn't the beauty of the house, it was the details of the sale. The property had been on the market for only 2 weeks, which in the current market was practically no time at all. The sellers were asking for cash offers only, no financing contingencies, with a quick close date. This suggested to me that the sellers were motivated, possibly facing some kind of deadline or financial pressure. In my years of real estate investing, I'd learned to recognize opportunity in other people's urgency. I spent the next several days quietly researching the property's history, the seller's situation, and the neighborhood market trends. What I discovered was even more interesting than I'd expected. The sellers were an elderly couple who had inherited the house from a relative, but lived in Florida, and had no interest in maintaining a property in Chicago. They wanted a quick, clean sale with minimal complications. The house had been priced aggressively to attract serious buyers, but the cash-only requirement was eliminating most potential purchasers. Even more intriguing was the fact that similar properties in the neighborhood had sold for significantly more than the asking price. This house was actually undervalued, probably because the sellers prioritized speed over maximum profit. For Emma and David, the cash requirement made the house impossible to acquire. but for someone with liquid assets and real estate experience, it represented an exceptional opportunity. I printed out the listing and tucked it into my folder of investment documents. Emma had no idea that, while she was dreaming about living in 1247 Willowbrook Lane, I was calculating whether it would make a smart addition to my real estate portfolio. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house that Emma saw as the symbol of her successful future, the place where she belonged, might very well become the vehicle for teaching her about respect, gratitude, and the consequences of taking people for granted. Sometimes the universe provides exactly the tools you need, right when you need them most. The Mid-Autumn Festival had always been my favorite holiday, a time when the boundary between earth and heaven felt thinnest, when families gathered to honor ancestors and celebrate abundance. This year, I was determined to share the tradition properly with Tommy, despite Emma's growing resistance to what she called my ethnic activities. I spent the morning in Chinatown, selecting the finest ingredients for traditional mooncakes: lotus seed paste, salted egg yolks, golden syrup, and lye water for the perfect texture. The elderly shop owner, Mr. Wu, smiled when I explained I was making them for my grandson. "Lucky boy," he said in Mandarin. "Homemade mooncakes carry the love of 3 generations." At home, I cleared the kitchen counter and laid out my mother's recipe, written in her careful Chinese characters on paper that had yellowed with age. The process was labor-intensive: mixing the dough, preparing the filling, molding each cake by hand in wooden forms that had belonged to my grandmother. Tommy watched with fascination as I pressed intricate designs into each cake's surface symbols for longevity, prosperity, and family harmony. "Why do we make these special cookies, Nai?" he asked, perched on a stool beside me. "They're not cookies, sweetheart. They're mooncakes, and we make them to celebrate the harvest moon. Tonight, when the moon is fullest, families all over the world will look up at the same moon and think about the people they love." Emma walked into the kitchen as I was brushing the mooncakes with egg wash before their final baking. She surveyed the flour-dusted counters, the array of ingredients, and the traditional tea service I'd set out for our evening celebration. "What's all this?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew and wasn't pleased. "It's Mid-Autumn Festival," Tommy announced proudly. "Nai is teaching me about Chinese culture." Emma's smile looked strained. "That's nice, but honey, we talked about keeping cultural activities appropriate for mixed families." "What do you mean by appropriate?" I asked quietly, continuing to brush my mooncakes. "I just mean that Tommy is half American, and I want him to feel comfortable in both cultures. Some of these old traditions might seem strange to his friends." The word strange hung in the air between us like a physical presence. I set down my brush and looked at Emma directly. "My culture is not strange. It is ancient, beautiful, and part of your son's heritage." "I didn't say it was strange," Emma backtracked. "I just think we should be mindful about which traditions we emphasize. We don't want Tommy to feel different from other kids." Tommy looked confused, glancing between his mother and me. "But I like being different. Mrs. Peterson says diversity makes the world more interesting." "That's true, sweetie," Emma said, her voice artificially bright. "But maybe we could celebrate in a more private way." Private, as if my culture was something shameful that needed to be hidden away. That evening, despite Emma's disapproval, I proceeded with our festival celebration. I set up a small altar in the living room with offerings of fruit, tea, and our homemade mooncakes. Tommy helped me light incense and arrange chrysanthemums in a vase. "Now we go outside to see the moon," I told him, leading him to our small backyard. The moon was indeed magnificent that night, full and golden, hanging low in the clear autumn sky. I pointed to its surface and told Tommy the legend of Chang'e, the moon goddess who lived in a palace among the stars. "Is she lonely up there?" Tommy asked, staring up at the moon with wide eyes. "Sometimes," I said, "but every year during the festival, She looks down at all the families celebrating together, and she remembers that love connects us across any distance. We sat on the back steps sharing moon cakes and tea, talking about the moon's different phases and the stories people around the world told about its power. Tommy was enchanted, asking questions about Chinese myths and traditions I hadn't shared with him before. Can we do this every year? Nai, of course we can, I promised, though I wondered if Emma would allow it. When we came back inside, Emma was waiting in the living room with David, who had just returned from work. They both looked at our altar setup with expressions I couldn't quite read. How was your moon festival? David asked diplomatically. Amazing, Tommy burst out. Nana told me about the moon goddess, and we made special cakes, and she taught me a song in Chinese. Emma's jaw tightened. What song? Tommy began singing a simple children's lullaby about the moon and stars, his pronunciation careful but enthusiastic. It was the same song my mother had sung to me, the one I'd sung to David when he was small. That's lovely, David said, genuinely pleased. I remember that song, but Emma's face had gone pale. Tommy, honey, why don't you go get ready for your bath? After Tommy left the room, Emma turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, controlled anger barely held in check. Grace, we need to talk, she said. I've been patient about your cultural activities, but I think we need to establish some boundaries. What kind of boundaries? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. I don't want Tommy learning Chinese songs or stories that his friends won't understand. I don't want him bringing strange food to school or talking about Chinese festivals. He needs to fit in with American children. The words hit me like physical blows. Strange food, Chinese festivals that needed to be hidden. A grandson who should be ashamed of half his heritage. His culture is not something to be ashamed of, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm not saying he should be ashamed, Emma replied. I'm saying he should be practical. The world is competitive enough without adding extra complications. David looked uncomfortable, but remained silent, caught between his wife and his mother, unwilling to take sides in a battle he didn't fully understand. That night, as I cleaned up the remnants of our celebration, I carefully wrapped the remaining moon cakes and put them in the freezer. I folded the altar cloth my grandmother had embroidered and packed away the incense holder that had been blessed in temples across 3 continents. Emma wanted me to hide my culture, to make my traditions private, to help her raise a grandson who would be ashamed of where he came from. She saw my heritage as a liability, something that would hold Tommy back rather than enrich his understanding of the world. But culture isn't something you can simply choose to discard. It lives in your bones, in the stories that shape your understanding of love and loss, in the recipes that carry the care of generations. Emma could ask me to make it private, but she couldn't ask me to make it disappear. The moon goddess Chang'e, looking down from her lonely palace, understood something Emma didn't, that love transcends distance, language, and cultural differences, but it cannot survive disrespect. Tommy's 7th birthday party was supposed to be a celebration, but it became the moment everything changed between Emma and me forever. We'd planned it together over several weeks, or rather, Emma had planned it while I provided practical support, as had become our unspoken arrangement. I want to make this really special, Emma had said, showing me Pinterest boards filled with dinosaur-themed decorations. Tommy deserves a party he'll remember. I'd offered to help with the food preparation, the decorations, whatever was needed. Despite our recent tensions, I wanted Tommy's day to be perfect. I spent hours the night before making his favorite dumplings, cutting vegetables into dinosaur shapes, and preparing a traditional Chinese birthday dish, longevity noodles, for good luck. The party was held at Riverside Park, with 20 of Tommy's classmates and their parents in attendance. Emma had outdone herself, with the decorations green and brown streamers everywhere, dinosaur cutouts hung from trees, and a magnificent T-Rex pippata that Tommy had been excited about for weeks. I arrived early to help set up, wearing my best dress and carrying containers of food. Emma looked beautiful in a flowing sundress that perfectly matched the party's color scheme. She was in her element as hostess, greeting each arriving family with warm smiles and easy conversation. "Grace, could you handle the food table?" she asked, barely looking at me as she directed traffic. "Just set everything out neatly." I arranged the dishes carefully, putting my homemade items alongside the store-bought sandwiches and fruit platters Emma had ordered. The longevity noodles looked elegant in the serving bowl I'd chosen, and several parents commented positively on the variety of food options. Everything was going well until Tommy opened his presents. Among the toys and games from his friends, he found the gift I'd carefully wrapped the night before, a beautiful set of Chinese paintbrushes and inkstones, along with a book of traditional poetry written in both Chinese and English. "This is from Nai," Tommy announced proudly, showing the gift to his friends. "She's teaching me to write Chinese characters." One of the mothers, Mrs. Henderson, leaned in to look at the gift with interest. How wonderful. What a unique cultural experience for Tommy. But I noticed Emma's face tighten, and when another parent asked about Tommy's Chinese lessons, her response was carefully measured. "Oh, Grace likes to share little bits of her culture with Tommy. It's sweet, really, little bits, sweet, as if my heritage was a charming hobby rather than a fundamental part of Tommy's identity." The moment that changed everything came during the cake ceremony. As we gathered around the dinosaur-themed cake, Tommy spontaneously began singing "Happy Birthday" in Chinese, a song I'd taught him just the week before. His pronunciation was careful and proud, and he beamed as he finished the song. The other children were delighted, clapping and asking him to teach them the words. But when I looked at Emma, her face was flushed with what I recognized as embarrassment and anger. "That's lovely, Tommy," she said tightly. "Now let's sing it in English, so everyone can join in." After the English version, as parents began chatting while the children played, I overheard Emma talking to a group of mothers near the pavilion. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her voice carried clearly across the park. "I keep trying to help Grace understand that we need to be mindful about cultural things," she was saying. "Tommy's still so young and impressionable, and some of these old traditions are just, well, they're not really appropriate for American children." My cheeks burned with humiliation, but worse was coming. "I mean, I appreciate that she wants to be involved," Emma continued, "but sometimes her old Asian ways are honestly just embarrassing. Last week she tried to set up some kind of shrine in our living room. I had to explain that we're not that kind of family." The words hit me like a physical blow. Old Asian ways. Embarrassing. Not that kind of family. Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through my shock. "Emma, I think cultural diversity is wonderful for children. Tommy seems so proud of his heritage." "Oh, of course," Emma backtracked quickly. "I support diversity. I just think there's a time and place for everything. You know, we want Tommy to fit in with his peers." I stood frozen by the food table, containers of my carefully prepared dishes, suddenly feeling like evidence of my foreignness, my otherness, my embarrassing inability to understand what was appropriate. One of the other mothers, Mrs. Park, who was Korean American, looked uncomfortable. "I think it's beautiful that Tommy is learning about both sides of his family," she said quietly. "Absolutely," Emma agreed too quickly. "In private, at home, but in public settings like this, we try to keep things more universal." Universal. As if my culture was divisive, as if teaching my grandson to be proud of his Chinese heritage was somehow exclusionary or inappropriate. I felt tears threatening and knew I had to leave before I broke down completely in front of all these people. I began quietly packing up my food containers, my hands shaking as I sealed lids and gathered serving spoons. Tommy appeared at my side as I was loading containers into my car. "Nai, where are you going? We haven't had cake yet." I knelt down to his level, forcing a smile I didn't feel. "I need to go home early, sweetheart. But you stay and enjoy your party." Mommy will bring you home later. But I want you to stay, he said, his lower lip trembling. It's my birthday, and you're supposed to be here. The innocence in his voice nearly broke me. I'll always be here for you, Tommy. Always. But sometimes grown-ups need to step away when things get complicated. Emma appeared behind Tommy, her face flushed but her voice artificially bright. Grace, you don't have to leave. I was just talking with the other parents about how much they enjoyed the food. The lie was smooth and practiced, but I could see the relief in her eyes. She wanted me gone, wanted to continue her party, without the embarrassment of my presence, my old Asian ways, my inappropriate cultural contributions. It's fine, I said quietly. I have things to do at home. As I drove away from the park, I could see Tommy in my rearview mirror, standing beside the picnic table, looking confused and sad. Emma had her hand on his shoulder, probably explaining why Grandma had to leave early, spinning some story that would make sense to a 7-year-old at home. I sat in my room and let the tears come. Emma's words echoed in my head. Embarrassing. Old Asian ways. Not that kind of family. After 7 years of welcoming her into our family, of supporting her dreams, of loving her like the daughter I'd never had, this was how she saw me, as an embarrassment to be managed, a cultural liability, to be minimized, the woman I had paid for graduate school, who had cried grateful tears in my kitchen, who had promised to always respect and appreciate my support, had just told a group of strangers that my heritage was embarrassing and inappropriate for her son. But Emma had made a crucial miscalculation. She had humiliated me in public, dismissing not just me, but an entire culture that had survived thousands of years of challenges, far greater than her social anxiety. She had forgotten that the quiet, accommodating woman she took for granted was the same woman who had built a fortune through determination and strategic thinking. She wanted me to learn my place, to understand that in her vision of success, there was no room for my old Asian ways. What she didn't realize was that those old ways included lessons about patience, planning, and the long game. She was about to discover that respect isn't optional, and that some lessons can only be learned the hard way. As I sat in my room that night, listening to Tommy's excited chatter as David and Emma brought him home from his party, I made a decision that would change all our lives forever. Emma wanted to teach me about fitting in, about what was appropriate, and what was embarrassing. It was time for me to teach her a few lessons of my own. That night, after the house had fallen silent, and Emma's cruel words still echoed in my mind, I sat at my small desk and opened the locked filing cabinet I'd kept hidden in my closet for 25 years. Inside were documents that told a story Emma had never imagined the real story of who Grace Chen actually was. The portfolio statement on top showed a number that would have shocked anyone who knew me as the quiet bank teller who lived modestly with her son's family for $0.2 million in liquid assets, not counting the real estate holdings that comprised the bulk of my wealth. 18 properties across Chicago and its suburbs, each one carefully chosen and meticulously maintained. The modest apartment building where Mrs. Wong still lived, paying me rent without knowing I was her landlord. The renovated townhouses in Lincoln Park that commanded premium rents from young professionals. The small office complex in Chinatown where immigrant families ran their first American businesses. I spread the documents across my desk like pieces of a puzzle, each one representing years of careful planning, sacrifice, and strategic thinking. The bank statements, property deeds, investment account summaries, and business records painted a picture of financial success that I'd spent decades keeping secret. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Emma complained about my embarrassing old Asian ways, those same ways, the patience, the long-term thinking, the careful saving, and strategic investing had made me wealthier than she could imagine. The woman she wanted to hide away had quietly built an empire while she was still struggling through graduate school. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and began calculating. If I liquidated just a portion of my stock holdings, I would have more than enough cash to purchase 1247 Willowbrook Lane outright. The house Emma dreamed of, the symbol of success she felt she deserved, could be mine with a simple phone call to my broker. But this wasn't just about buying a house. This was about teaching a lesson that would resonate for years to come. I thought about my parents, who had lost everything twice in their lives, but never lost their dignity. They had taught me that respect is earned through character, not demanded through position. They had shown me that true strength comes from enduring hardship with grace, not from tearing others down to build yourself up. Emma had forgotten the fundamental truth that my parents understood. Today's victim might be tomorrow's judge. She had treated me as if I were powerless, as if my opinion didn't matter, as if my presence in Tommy's life was a burden to be managed rather than a gift to be treasured. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for James Morrison, the real estate attorney who had handled my property acquisitions for the past 15 years. James knew me as a serious investor with impeccable credit and a talent for identifying undervalued properties. He had no idea that the successful businesswoman he respected was the same person Emma saw as an embarrassing relic of old traditions. It was nearly midnight, but I composed a careful email explaining my interest in the Willowbrook property and requesting his assistance with a cash purchase. I wanted everything handled through my shell company, Chen Holdings LLC, to maintain privacy during the transaction. As I hit send, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and determination. I hadn't wanted things to come to this. For 7 years, I had tried to be the supportive mother-in-law, the helpful grandmother, the accommodating family member who put everyone else's comfort before her own dignity. But Emma's public humiliation had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She had made it clear that in her vision of the family's future, there was no place for me, my culture, or my influence on Tommy. She wanted me gone, and she was willing to crush my spirit to make that happen. What she didn't understand was that I hadn't survived immigration, poverty, discrimination, and decades of building a business by being easily broken. The quiet strength she mistook for weakness was actually the foundation of everything I'd accomplished. I opened my laptop and began researching Emma's current employment situation. Her pharmaceutical sales job was successful, but not stable. I knew from overheard phone calls that her company was going through restructuring, and several of her colleagues had already been laid off. David's promotion was significant, but his salary alone wouldn't qualify them for the mortgage on their dream house, especially not in the current market. They were living right at the edge of their means, projecting an image of success that was more aspiration than reality. The dream house represented not just a home to them, but validation of their worth, proof that they had achieved the American dream. I looked at the real estate listing one more time, studying the photos of the kitchen, where Emma planned to host dinner parties, the master suite where she imagined herself as lady of the manor, the garden where she pictured Tommy playing while she supervised from the terrace. In her mind, this house would be the setting for a life where my embarrassing presence was no longer necessary, where Tommy could grow up without the complication of Chinese traditions, where she could be the mother and wife she believed she deserved to be. But houses, I had learned through decades of real estate investing, are more than just buildings. They're symbols of power, security, and belonging. They can provide sanctuary, but they can also become prisons. They can represent dreams achieved, but also lessons learned. Emma wanted this house to be her escape from me. Instead, it was going to become the classroom where she learned about consequences, respect, and the cost of underestimating quiet people. As I closed the filing cabinet and prepared for bed, I felt a calm settle over me that I hadn't experienced since Tommy's party. For the first time in months, I wasn't the victim of Emma's cruelty or the silent observer of my own humiliation. I was Grace Chen, successful businesswoman, strategic thinker, and loving grandmother. And I was about to remind everyone, especially Emma, that old Asian ways include some very effective methods for dealing with people who mistake kindness for weakness. The next morning, I retrieved my father's copy of Sun Tzu's The Art of War from the bookshelf in my room. The slim volume was worn from decades of reading, its margins filled with notes in my father's careful Chinese calligraphy. He had given it to me when I graduated high school, telling me that business and life required the same strategic thinking as warfare. Know yourself and know your enemy. I read aloud in Mandarin, tracing my finger along the familiar characters. In 100 battles, you will never be defeated. I knew myself, a woman who had built wealth through patience and careful planning, who valued family above all else, but who would not tolerate disrespect. Now I needed to fully understand my opponent. Emma's weakness was her need for external validation. Everything about her life was designed to create an image of success for others to admire. The right clothes, the right neighborhood, the right social connections, all carefully curated to project an identity that would earn her the respect she craved. But image without substance is fragile. Strip away the external trappings, and what remained? I spent the morning conducting research with the thoroughness my father had taught me. Emma's social media profiles told a story of aspiration and ambition. Photos of designer handbags, expensive restaurants, carefully staged family moments. Her LinkedIn profile emphasized her sales achievements, but also revealed the instability of her industry. Most telling were her Pinterest boards, dozens of them dedicated to the life she wanted to live. Dream home goals, luxury kitchen ideas, executive wife style, successful family life. Page after page of images representing a lifestyle just beyond her current reach. She had created an entire fantasy around the Willowbrook house, pinning photos of furniture arrangements, dinner party setups, holiday decorations. She had mentally moved in already, had begun identifying herself as the kind of person who belonged in such a place. This made her vulnerable in ways she didn't understand. James Morrison called me back within 2 hours of receiving my email. Grace, the Willowbrook property is interesting, he said. The sellers are motivated, and a cash offer would definitely get their attention. But I want to make sure you understand the market dynamics. Tell me everything, I said, settling in for a detailed conversation. The property has been on the market for 3 weeks now, which is unusual in this market. The cash-only requirement has eliminated most buyers, but the few who remain are serious. I've heard there are at least 2 other potential offers in the works. What kind of timeline are we looking at? If you're serious about making an offer, we should move quickly. The sellers want to close within 30 days, which works in favor of cash buyers who don't need financing approval. I thought about Emma's timeline. David had mentioned that they were planning to submit their mortgage application next week, hoping to get pre-approved for a loan that would stretch their finances to the limit. Even if they were approved, the financing process would take 60 to 90 days to slow for these sellers. James, I want you to prepare an offer for the full asking price, all cash, with a 15-day close, I said. But I want the offer to come from Chen Holdings, and I want my personal involvement kept confidential. Understood? This is a strong offer, Grace. I think you'll get the house. After hanging up, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Sun Tzu had written that the supreme excellence of strategy was to subdue the enemy without fighting. Emma would defeat herself. I was simply creating the circumstances for her own actions, to teach her the lesson she needed to learn. That afternoon, while Emma was at work and David was at the office, I took Tommy to the park. We sat on the swings while he told me about his school day, his friends, his upcoming science project. His chatter was a balm to my heart, reminding me why this battle was necessary. Nai, he said suddenly. Why was Mommy upset after my party? The question caught me off guard. What makes you think she was upset? She was quiet in the car, and she and Daddy talked in their room with the door closed. They do that when something's wrong. Children notice everything, even when adults think they're being discreet. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups have different ideas about things, and they need to work them out, I said. But you don't need to worry about that. Your mommy and daddy love you very much. Do you love me too? More than all the stars in the sky, I said, the traditional response I'd given him since he was a toddler. Even if I have to choose between Chinese things and American things, the question pierced my heart. At 7 years old, Tommy was already sensing the cultural tension in our house, already feeling pressure to choose sides in a battle he shouldn't have to fight. You never have to choose, I told him firmly. You are Chinese and American. Both parts make you who you are, and both parts are beautiful. But Mommy says, what does Mommy say? Tommy hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. She says some things are better kept private, that other kids might not understand. I took a deep breath, feeling the full weight of what Emma was trying to do. She wasn't just rejecting me, she was teaching my grandson to be ashamed of his heritage, to hide the parts of himself that she found inconvenient. This wasn't just about respect anymore. This was about Tommy's future, his identity, his right to embrace all parts of himself without shame. Tommy, I said, taking his small hands in mine, being different is not something to hide. It's something to be proud of. Your Chinese heritage is a gift that connects you to thousands of years of wisdom, art, and culture. Never let anyone make you feel ashamed of who you are. That evening, I received confirmation that my offer on the Willowbrook house had been accepted. The sellers were thrilled with the cash offer and quick close timeline. James would handle all the paperwork, and I would own Emma's dream house within 2 weeks. I sat in my room that night, looking out the window at the quiet street where I'd lived for 3 years, and felt the strange calm that comes with decisive action. Emma had wanted to teach me my place, to show me that my old Asian ways had no value in her modern American life. Instead, she was about to learn that underestimating your opponent is the first step toward defeat, and that sometimes the most devastating victories come wrapped in the package of someone giving you exactly what you thought you wanted. The art of war, my father had taught me, is not about destruction, it's about correction. Emma was about to be corrected in ways she never saw coming. The purchase agreement arrived via email on a Wednesday morning, while Emma was getting ready for work. I was in the kitchen, preparing Tommy's lunch, when I heard the notification chime on my phone. The subject line from James Morrison simply read, Willowbrook, executed contract. My hands were steady as I opened the attachment and saw my electronic signature on the final page. Right next to the seller's signatures, 1247 Willowbrook Lane was officially mine, purchased for $2.8 million in cash through Chen Holdings, LLC. The closing was scheduled for the following Tuesday, exactly 13 days away. I slipped my phone back into my pocket just as Emma rushed into the kitchen, checking her watch and grabbing her coffee travel mug. Grace, can you pick up Tommy from school today? I have a client dinner that might run late, she said without looking at me, her attention focused on gathering her purse and files. Of course, I replied, the same accommodating response I'd given hundreds of times before. Emma paused at the kitchen door, and for a moment I thought she might acknowledge the tension that had existed between us since Tommy's party. But instead, she simply said, thanks, oh, and David and I are meeting with our mortgage broker this weekend. We're finally going to put in an offer on that house. The irony was almost too perfect. While Emma was planning to apply for a loan she probably wouldn't qualify for, I had already bought her dream house outright. That's exciting, I managed to say. I hope everything works out. Emma smiled, the first genuine smile she directed at me in weeks. It will. David's promotion changes everything. We're finally ready to move forward with our real life, as if the 3 years we'd shared as a family had been some kind of temporary arrangement, a placeholder, until they could afford to live without me. After Emma left for work, I called James Morrison to confirm the closing details. Everything's on track, he assured me. The sellers are motivated. The title is clear, and your funds have been verified. You'll own the property by next Tuesday afternoon, and you're certain my identity will remain confidential. Absolutely. All documents show Chen Holdings LLC as the purchaser, unless someone specifically investigates the ownership structure of your company. There's no way to trace this back to you personally. I spent the rest of the morning researching property management companies. Once I owned the house, I would need professional help to maintain it, especially since I had no intention of living there myself. I found a reputable firm that specialized in luxury properties and scheduled a consultation for the day after closing. The plan forming in my mind was elegant in its simplicity. I would own Emma's dream house, but I would rent it to her at fair market value. She could have everything she wanted: the prestigious address, the beautiful kitchen, the social status that came with living in Willowbrook, but she would have it as my tenant, not as an owner. It would be a daily reminder that respect matters, that consequences follow actions, and that the woman she had dismissed as an embarrassing burden was actually the person controlling her access to the life she desperately wanted. That afternoon, I picked up Tommy from school as promised. He climbed into my car chattering excitedly about a field trip to the Science Museum, his backpack stuffed with permission slips and fundraising forms. "Nai, do you want to come on the field trip too?" he asked as I drove toward home. "Parents and grandparents can volunteer as chaperones." "I would love to," I said, though I wondered if Emma would allow it. "Great. I'll tell Mommy tonight. She always says she's too busy with work. But maybe you can come instead." The innocence in his voice broke my heart. Tommy had no idea that his mother was actively trying to minimize my role in his life, that she saw my involvement in his activities as problematic rather than supportive. When we arrived home, Tommy settled at the kitchen table with his homework while I prepared dinner. David arrived home earlier than usual, looking pleased with himself. "Good news," he announced, loosening his tie as he entered the kitchen. "The mortgage broker says we'll qualify for the loan we need. Emma and I are going to look at the house again this weekend and then submit our offer." I continued stirring the soup I was making, keeping my expression neutral. "That's wonderful. You both seem very excited about it." "We are. It feels like the right time. You know, with my promotion and Emma's sales bonuses, we can finally afford something really special." He paused, then added, "Of course, you'll always have a place with us, Mom. The new house has a guest room that would be perfect for you." A guest room. After 3 years of being an integral part of their daily lives, I was being relegated to guest status in their new life. The message was clear. I would be welcome to visit, but not to live as family. "That's very thoughtful," I said, though we both knew the offer was more about politeness than genuine desire for my continued presence. That evening, after dinner was cleared and Tommy was in bed, Emma spread real estate documents across the dining table. She and David pored over mortgage calculations, down payment options, and closing timelines with the intensity of people planning the most important purchase of their lives. "If we submit the offer Monday morning, we should hear back within 24 hours, Emma said, highlighting sections of the purchase agreement template their broker had provided. "The market is competitive, but our broker thinks we have a good chance." I watched them plan for something that was already mine, feeling a mixture of anticipation and sadness. They had no idea that their dream house had already been sold, that their careful financial planning was pointless, that the life they were designing around this property would need to be completely reconsidered. The next few days passed with agonizing slowness. Emma and David visited the house twice more, each time returning with renewed enthusiasm and more detailed plans for their future life. Emma researched private schools in the area. David calculated his commute time, and they both talked endlessly about the dinner parties they would host and the impression they would make on their new neighbors. On Monday morning, I watched Emma leave for work with the signed purchase offer in her briefcase, confident that she was about to secure the house that would transform their lives. She had no idea that in exactly 24 hours, she would learn that her dream house belonged to someone she had dismissed as an embarrassing relic of old traditions. The closing was scheduled for Tuesday at 2 p.m. By Tuesday evening, I would own the property Emma believed was destined to be hers, and then the real education would begin. The phone call came at 3:47 p.m. on Tuesday, exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes after I had officially become the owner of 1247 Willowbrook Lane. I was in the kitchen, preparing Tommy's after-school snack when Emma's ringtone filled the quiet house. Grace. Her voice was strained, confused. Is David there? He's still at work. Is everything all right? There was a long pause, and when Emma spoke again, her voice was smaller, more vulnerable than I'd heard it in months. Something's wrong with the house. A realtor called and said the property has already been sold. But that's impossible. We submitted our offer yesterday, and the listing is still active. I set down the apple I was slicing and chose my words carefully. Maybe there was some kind of mistake. That's what I thought. But our realtor checked with the listing agent. The house sold last week to a cash buyer who wanted a quick close. They're saying the online listing just hasn't been updated yet. Emma's breath caught, and I could hear her fighting back tears. Grace, we put everything into this. We got pre-approved for the mortgage. We planned our whole future around this house. How could it just be gone? For a moment, listening to the genuine pain in her voice, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I'm sorry, Emma. I know how much that house meant to you. It wasn't just a house, she said, her voice breaking. It was everything we've been working toward. The right neighborhood, the right schools for Tommy, the right life. And now some stranger with cash has just taken it. Some stranger. If only she knew. When David arrived home an hour later, he found Emma sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by crumpled tissues, her laptop open to real estate websites, as she desperately searched for alternative properties. There's nothing else like it, she was saying as I listened from the kitchen. Nothing in our price range in that neighborhood. The house was perfect, and now it's gone. David rubbed her shoulders sympathetically. We'll find something else. Maybe this is a sign that we should expand our search. Look at different areas. You don't understand, Emma said, her voice rising. I've already told everyone about the house. My co-workers, my friends, my mother. I've been planning our housewarming party, researching the country club membership, looking at private schools. This wasn't just about finding a place to live, this was about our future. I understood now why this house had meant so much to her. It wasn't just about square footage or granite countertops. The house had been her symbol of arrival, her proof that she had transcended her middle-class background and achieved the success she'd always craved. Without it, she was back to being ordinary. The next few days were difficult to watch. Emma threw herself into house hunting with desperate intensity, but nothing else measured up to her lost dream house. Properties in their price range felt like compromises, and houses that matched her vision cost far more than they could afford. David tried to be supportive, but I could see the strain beginning to show. The mortgage pre-approval that had seemed like such a victory now felt like a cruel tease, qualifying them for a dream that had been snatched away by someone with deeper pockets. On Friday evening, I made my decision. It was time. David, Emma, I said as we finished dinner, could we talk in the living room? There's something I need to share with you. They exchanged glances, probably expecting another one of my cultural lectures or a suggestion about expanding their house search. We settled in the living room, Tommy upstairs playing video games, the house quiet around us. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small wrapped box, setting it on the coffee table between us. What's this? Emma asked, her voice cautious. Open it, I said simply. Emma unwrapped the box slowly, as if she suspected it might contain something unpleasant. When she lifted the lid, her face went completely blank. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper, were 2 keys on a silver ring. I don't understand, David said, leaning forward to look at the keys. What are these for? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of this moment. They're the keys to 1247 Willowbrook Lane. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the kitchen clock ticking from the next room. Emma was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper. What do you mean? I bought the house last Tuesday. Cash offer. Quick close. The house you've been mourning for the past week belongs to me. David's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally something approaching shock. Mom, that's impossible. That house cost almost $3 million, $2.8 million, to be exact, I corrected gently. And it wasn't impossible for me. Emma was staring at the keys, as if they were poisonous snakes. You bought our house? How could you afford? She stopped mid-sentence, her mind working through the implications. Who are you? She whispered. I smiled, feeling a strange sense of relief at finally being able to speak the truth. I'm Grace Chen. I'm a successful real estate investor who has built a portfolio worth over $8 million over the past 25 years. I own 18 properties in Chicago. I have multiple investment accounts, and I am what most people would consider quite wealthy. David was shaking his head slowly. Mom, why didn't you ever tell us? Because I wanted you to build your own character through your own achievements. Because wealth can complicate relationships in ways that aren't always healthy. And because I believed that people who truly loved me would respect me regardless of my financial situation. Emma's face was cycling through emotions: shock, embarrassment, anger, and something that might have been fear. You bought our house, she repeated. Our dream house. I bought a house that you wanted, but couldn't afford, I corrected. And now I'm offering to rent it to you at fair market value. You can have everything you wanted: the address, the prestige, the lifestyle, but you'll have it as my tenants. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Emma stood up abruptly, her hands shaking. This is insane. You're our family. You can't just buy our dreams and hold them hostage. I'm not holding anything hostage, I said calmly. I'm offering you an opportunity to live in the house you love, under terms that reflect the reality of our relationship. What reality? David asked, though I could see understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. The reality that respect is not optional. The reality that family means treating each other with dignity, not embarrassment. The reality that your wife has spent months making it clear that she finds my presence in your lives to be a burden. She wants to eliminate. Emma's face went pale. You heard what I said at Tommy's party. I heard you tell a group of strangers that my old Asian ways are embarrassing and inappropriate for your family. I heard you dismiss 30 years of sacrifice and love as something to be managed and minimized. The truth settled over the room like a heavy blanket. So here's what's going to happen, I continued. You can rent the house from me for $8,000 a month, which is fair market value for a property of that size and location. You'll sign a standard lease agreement, follow the same rules as any other tenants, and treat me with the respect you would show any landlord. Emma was crying now, tears of rage and humiliation streaming down her face. You're punishing us for one bad moment, for words said in frustration. I'm teaching you a lesson about consequences. You wanted me to know my place, Emma. Now you know yours. The lease agreement arrived by email 3 days later. Professional and thorough. Prepared by James Morrison's legal team. I printed 2 copies and placed them on the dining table where Emma and David could review the terms that would govern their tenancy in what had once been their dream house. The silence in our home, since my revelation, had been deafening. Emma spoke to me only when absolutely necessary, her responses clipped and cold. David tried to mediate, clearly struggling to process this new version of his mother: wealthy, strategic, and unwilling to be dismissed. The rent is fair, David said after reviewing the lease. $8,000 is actually below market rate for that neighborhood. Emma sat across from him, her arms crossed, radiating anger. It's not about the money, David. It's about control. She's manipulating us. How is offering you the house you wanted manipulation? I asked from the doorway. Emma whirled to face me. Because you're doing it to punish me. You could have just given us the house, or sold it to us at cost, or what? Pretended that respect doesn't matter. Acted as if your public humiliation of me was just a minor disagreement. I sat down across from them, my voice calm, but firm. Emma, for 7 years I treated you like the daughter I never had. I supported your education, welcomed you into our family, cared for your son while you built your career, and in return, you decided that my culture, my traditions, and my presence in Tommy's life were embarrassments to be hidden away. David shifted uncomfortably. Mom, maybe we can find a middle ground here. There is no middle ground when it comes to basic respect. I interrupted. Your wife made her feelings about me crystal clear. Now she gets to live with the consequences of those feelings. Emma's voice was bitter. So you're saying that, unless I pretend to love every single thing about Chinese culture, I can't have the house? I'm saying that unless you can treat me as an equal member of this family, our relationship will be that of landlord and tenant rather than mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. The lease terms were straightforward, but comprehensive. $8,000 monthly rent, first and last month's rent due at signing, security deposit equal to 1 month's rent, standard maintenance responsibilities, noise restrictions, and occupancy limits. Most importantly, a clause stating that any violations of the lease terms or any behavior deemed disrespectful to the property owner could result in immediate termination of the rental agreement. This clause about disrespectful behavior, Emma said, pointing to the relevant section. That's completely subjective. You could evict us for anything. Yes, I agreed. I could. Just like you could dismiss my culture and heritage as embarrassing old Asian ways and expect no consequences. David rubbed his temples. Mom, I understand you're hurt, but this feels like you're holding the house hostage to force Emma to change her attitude. I'm not forcing anything. Emma is free to maintain whatever attitude she chooses. She's also free to find somewhere else to live if she finds my conditions unacceptable. The power dynamic in our family had shifted completely, and everyone could feel it. For the first time in months, Emma had to consider my feelings before speaking. Every interaction was filtered through the knowledge that I controlled access to the life she desperately wanted. It took 2 weeks for them to sign the lease. During that time, Emma researched other properties obsessively, trying to find an alternative that would free her from dependence on me. But nothing else compared to the Willowbrook house, and nothing else fit their budget as perfectly as my below-market rent. The day they signed the lease was awkward and tense. Emma's signature was sharp and angry, each letter a small act of rebellion against the situation she found herself in. When can we move in? David asked, trying to inject some normalcy into the proceedings. The house is ready now, I said. I've had it professionally cleaned and inspected. You can start moving whenever you're ready. Emma looked up sharply. And where will you be living? I'll be staying here, in our current home. This apartment suits me perfectly. The relief on Emma's face was obvious, quickly followed by confusion. But I thought, isn't the whole point that you want to live with us? The point, Emma, is that I want to be treated with respect by my family. Where I choose to live is my decision to make. Over the next month, I watched them move into their dream house with mixed emotions. Tommy was ecstatic about his new bedroom and the large backyard where he could play. David seemed genuinely happy with the space and the neighborhood. Even Emma, despite her resentment toward me, couldn't hide her pleasure in finally achieving the lifestyle she'd craved. But the relationship between us had fundamentally changed. When they called with maintenance issues, Emma's tone was formally polite rather than familiar. When I came by to check on the property, she treated me like a landlord rather than family. When we discussed Tommy's activities or school events, There was a careful distance that hadn't existed before. The house was theirs to enjoy, but on my terms. They had learned that actions have consequences, that respect isn't optional, and that quiet people sometimes hold more power than anyone realizes. 3 months into their tenancy, the first violation occurred. I arrived for a routine property inspection to find that Emma had removed the traditional Chinese screen I'd placed in the entryway, a beautiful antique piece that had belonged to my grandmother. "Where is the screen that was in the front hall?" I asked. Emma's cheeks flushed. "I put it in storage. It didn't really fit with our decorating style." I pulled out my copy of the lease and found the relevant clause. Section 12 clearly states that all furnishings and artwork provided with the property must remain in place, unless specifically approved for removal by the landlord. "It's just a screen, Grace. It's not like I threw it away. It's a violation of your lease agreement," I said calmly. "Please have it back in place by tomorrow, or we'll need to discuss termination of your tenancy." The screen was back in place by evening. Emma was learning, slowly and painfully, that respect isn't something you can withhold when convenient and expect when necessary. She was discovering that the woman she'd dismissed as an embarrassing burden was actually the person who controlled her access to the life she'd always wanted. It wasn't the relationship I'd hoped for with my daughter-in-law, but it was honest. And sometimes, honesty is the only foundation upon which real respect can be built. The eviction notice was delivered on a crisp October morning, exactly 6 months after Emma and David had moved into their dream house. I hadn't wanted it to come to this, but Emma's behavior had left me no choice. The final straw had been Tommy's Chinese New Year project. His second-grade teacher had assigned a cultural heritage presentation, and Tommy had excitedly chosen to share his Chinese background. He'd asked me to help him prepare traditional decorations, teach him a simple song, and explain the significance of the red envelopes and dragon dances. We'd spent weeks working together on his presentation, and I'd been so proud watching him practice his pronunciation of Chinese words and carefully drawing the characters for happiness and prosperity. His enthusiasm reminded me of myself at his age, eager to learn about the culture that connected me to my ancestors. But the night before his presentation, Emma intervened. "Tommy, I've been thinking about your project," she said during dinner. "Maybe we should focus on the American side of your heritage instead. You could talk about your grandfather's service in the military, or how Daddy's family came to Chicago." Tommy's face fell, but I already prepared the Chinese stuff with Nai. She taught me songs and everything. "I know, sweetheart, but some of the other children might not understand those traditions. Wouldn't you rather share something that everyone can relate to?" I watched my grandson struggle with confusion and disappointment. He'd been so excited about sharing his culture with his classmates, and now his mother was asking him to hide that part of himself because it might make others uncomfortable. "Emma," I said carefully, "Tommy has put a lot of work into this project. He's excited about sharing his heritage. His American heritage is just as important," Emma replied sharply. "More relevant, actually, since that's the culture he's growing up in." David tried to mediate. Maybe he could include both cultures, a little bit of each. But Emma shook her head. "The assignment is to choose one cultural background, I think. American makes more sense." That night, I heard Tommy crying in his room. When I went to check on him, he was lying in bed clutching the red envelope I'd given him for his presentation. "Nai, why doesn't Mommy want me to talk about being Chinese?" he asked through his tears. "Sometimes people get confused about what's important," I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "But being Chinese is part of who you are, and you should never be ashamed of that." "But what if the other kids think it's weird? Then you'll teach them something new, and they'll be lucky to learn from you." The next morning, Emma discovered that Tommy had gone ahead with his Chinese presentation anyway. His teacher called to say how wonderful it had been, how engaged the other children were, how proud Tommy seemed of his heritage. Emma was furious. "You went behind my back," She accused me that evening. I specifically told Tommy to change his project. And you encouraged him to disobey me. I encouraged him to be proud of who he is. You undermined my parenting. You made me look like the bad guy. You made yourself the bad guy when you asked your son to be ashamed of his culture. The argument escalated quickly, with Emma accusing me of trying to turn Tommy against her, and me pointing out that she was the one creating conflict by rejecting half of his identity. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Emma said, her voice rising. You use your relationship with Tommy to manipulate our family. You make me the villain for wanting my son to fit in. I make you the villain for wanting my grandson to deny who he is. David tried to intervene, but Emma turned on him too. Your mother is destroying our family. She's using that house to control us. And she's turning our son against me. Nobody is turning Tommy against you, David said wearily. You're doing that yourself. The words hung in the air, like a bomb that had finally exploded. Emma stared at her husband, tears streaming down her face. So you're taking her side? After everything we've been through, you're choosing your mother over your wife? David's shoulders sagged. I'm not choosing sides, Em. I'm just tired of fighting about this. Tommy should be proud of both sides of his heritage. Mom has never asked him to choose. You have. Fine, Emma said, her voice cold. If that's how you feel, maybe you should move back in with your mother. Clearly, she's more important to you than I am. She stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. David found her 3 hours later at her sister's apartment. She refused to come home that night, or the next night, or the night after that. On the 4th day, I received a text message from Emma. I need you to move out of the house. Tommy and I are coming home, but I can't live under the same roof as someone who constantly undermines my parenting. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling the weight of what it really meant. Emma was demanding that I leave the house I owned, the house I was renting to her family at below market rates, because she couldn't tolerate my presence in Tommy's life. She had forgotten, apparently, that I wasn't just his grandmother. I was also her landlord. The eviction notice was simple and legal. 30 days to vacate the premises for violation of lease terms, specifically the clause about respectful treatment of the property owner. James Morrison assured me that Emma's demand that I leave my own property constituted grounds for termination of the rental agreement. When David received the notice, he called me immediately. Mom, please, let's talk about this. Emma's just upset. She doesn't really want you out of Tommy's life. She wants me out of her life, I corrected. And since her life apparently includes preventing my grandson from embracing his heritage, I think it's time for some clarity about who makes the decisions here. You're going to evict us, your own family. The pain in his voice broke my heart, but I'd learned that sometimes love requires difficult choices. I'm going to evict a tenant who has repeatedly violated the terms of her lease, and who is demanding that I leave my own property. Emma has made it clear that she can't tolerate my presence in Tommy's life, so she can explain to him why they have to move again, why his dream house is being taken away, why his family is being torn apart. This will destroy us, David whispered. Emma destroyed this family the moment she decided that my love for Tommy was something to be managed and controlled rather than celebrated. I'm just making the consequences clear. The eviction notice gave them 30 days. I wondered if Emma would finally understand that actions have consequences, that respect isn't optional, and that sometimes the people you take for granted are the ones who hold all the power. Or if she would choose her pride over her family, her need to control over her son's happiness, her fear of my culture over the love that could heal all our wounds. The choice, as it had always been, was hers to make. The custody hearing was the most painful day of my life, even more devastating than the day my husband left us when David was 3. Sitting in that sterile courtroom, listening to lawyers argue about my right to see my own grandson, I felt the weight of how completely our family had fractured. Emma had filed for a restraining order to keep me away from Tommy, claiming that my interference in their family decisions and my manipulation through property ownership created an unsafe environment for her child. David sat beside her, his face gray with exhaustion and grief. Caught between the two women he loved most. My attorney, Patricia Wong, had been recommended by James Morrison. She was a small, fierce woman who specialized in grandparent rights cases and understood the cultural dynamics at play in our situation. Your Honor, Patricia argued, Mrs. Chen has been a primary caregiver for her grandson since birth. She picks him up from school daily, helps with homework, provides cultural education, and has formed a bond that is essential to the child's well-being. To suddenly sever that relationship would cause significant emotional harm to Tommy. Emma's lawyer painted a different picture. Your Honor, Mrs. Chen has used financial coercion to control this family. She purchased their home specifically to maintain power over them, then evicted them when the parents attempted to set reasonable boundaries about their child's upbringing. When Tommy was brought in for the judge's private interview, my heart shattered. At 7 years old, he was too young to understand the legal proceedings, but old enough to feel confused and frightened by the adults fighting around him. I wasn't allowed to speak to him before his interview, could only watch as he walked past me in the hallway, his small hand clutched in the court advocate's larger one. He looked so vulnerable in his school clothes, his hair neatly combed, but his eyes wide with uncertainty. 20 minutes later, the judge called us back into the courtroom. After speaking with Tommy, Judge Martinez announced, "It's clear that this child has a strong, loving relationship with his grandmother. He speaks about her with affection and credits her with teaching him important things about his heritage and family history." Emma's face went pale. However, the judge continued, "I'm also concerned about the level of conflict in this family and the impact it's having on the child. Tommy is aware that the adults in his life are fighting, and he's confused about why he can't see his grandmother." The judge's ruling was carefully crafted to protect Tommy while acknowledging the complexity of our situation. I would have supervised visitation rights for hours every Saturday afternoon, with the understanding that any attempt to alienate Tommy from his parents or involve him in adult conflicts would result in immediate suspension of visitation. Additionally, the court appointed a family therapist to work with all of us, recognizing that our issues went beyond legal arrangements and into the realm of damaged relationships that needed professional help to heal. Emma and David were required to find new housing within 60 days, since the eviction notice was legally valid, but they were also prohibited from moving Tommy more than 50 miles from his current school, ensuring that my visitation rights would be practical to maintain. The first supervised visit took place the following Saturday at a neutral location, a family center with playgrounds and activity rooms designed for court-ordered visits. A social worker named Mrs. Patterson observed our interaction while trying to remain unobtrusive. Tommy ran to me the moment he saw me, wrapping his arms around my waist with desperate intensity. "Nai, I missed you so much. Mommy said you were sick, but I knew you weren't really sick because you never get sick." I held him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo and feeling the solid warmth of his small body. "I missed you too, sweetheart, more than all the stars in the sky. Why can't you come home? Daddy says we have to move again, and Mommy cries a lot, and nobody will tell me what's happening." The social worker leaned forward slightly, and I knew I had to be careful with my words. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements that take time to work out, but no matter what happens, I will always love you, and I will always be your Nai. We spent the afternoon doing puzzles, reading books, and working on his Chinese writing. Tommy had forgotten some of the characters I'd taught him, but he remembered the stories behind them and asked me to help him practice. "Can you teach me the song about the moon goddess again?" he asked as our time together was ending. I glanced at Mrs. Patterson, who nodded encouragingly. Tommy and I sat together on the couch, and I sang the traditional lullaby my mother had taught me, the same song Emma had objected to during our Mid-Autumn Festival celebration. Tommy joined in with the parts he remembered, his voice sweet and earnest. When we finished, he looked up at me with serious eyes. Nai, are you and Mommy ever going to be friends again? The question pierced my heart. I hope so, Tommy. Sometimes it takes time for people to understand each other. I told the judge that I love you and Mommy both. I told him I don't want to choose sides because families are supposed to stay together. Out of the mouths of babes, my 7-year-old grandson understood something that all the adults in his life had forgotten. That love isn't a competition. That heritage isn't a threat. That families are strongest when they embrace all their parts rather than demanding people choose sides. As I watched Tommy leave with Mrs. Patterson, knowing it would be another week before I could see him again, I felt the full weight of what our conflict had cost. Emma had wanted to minimize my influence in Tommy's life, but her actions had traumatized him far more than my cultural lessons ever could have. We had all lost something precious in this battle. Tommy had lost the security of an intact family. David had lost the peace of his home. Emma had lost the respect and support she'd once taken for granted. And I had lost the daily joy of being part of my grandson's life. The simple pleasure of picking him up from school, helping with homework, and sharing the traditions that connected him to generations of ancestors who had loved and sacrificed for his future. The court had given me legal rights to see Tommy, but what I really wanted was what we'd lost: a family that could love and respect each other across cultural differences, a grandson who could embrace all parts of his identity without shame, a daughter-in-law who understood that my traditions weren't threats to her authority, but gifts to enrich her son's understanding of the world. The supervised visits would continue. The family therapy would slowly address our conflicts, and eventually, we would find some new version of normal. But the innocent trust and daily intimacy we'd once shared was gone, replaced by court orders and careful supervision. Tommy deserved better from all of us. And somehow, despite everything that had happened, I still believed that love could find a way to heal what pride and fear had broken. The job rejection letter arrived on a gray December morning, 2 months after Emma and David had moved into a cramped apartment in a neighborhood far from their previous aspiration. I learned about it not from Emma herself, but from David, who called me during one of our increasingly frequent conversations about Tommy's adjustment to our new family reality. Emma's company eliminated her position last week, he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Budget cuts. She's been applying everywhere, but the market is tough right now, especially with her sales being down the last few quarters. I listened without commenting, though I suspected Emma's declining performance was connected to the stress our family conflict had created. It's difficult to sell effectively when your personal life is in chaos. We're going to be okay financially, David continued quickly, probably worried I might interpret this as a request for help. My salary covers the rent and basics, but Emma's taking it hard. She built so much of her identity around her career success. 3 weeks later, I saw Emma at Tommy's school Christmas concert. She was sitting alone in the back row while David worked late, trying to make up for her lost income. I noticed how thin she'd become, how her clothes, once carefully coordinated and expensive, now looked worn and ill-fitting. During intermission, while Tommy was backstage preparing for the second act, Emma approached me hesitantly. "Grace," she said, her voice uncertain, Could we talk for a few minutes?" We found a quiet corner of the school hallway, away from the other parents, up close. Emma looked even more fragile than she had from across the auditorium. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her hands shook slightly as she clasped them in front of her. "I wanted to thank you," she began, then stopped, as if the words were difficult to form, "for not fighting the custody arrangement. I know you could have made things much harder for us. I studied her face, looking for signs of the calculating manipulation that had characterized our interactions for so long. Instead, I saw genuine exhaustion and what might have been the beginning of humility. Tommy needs stability right now, I said simply. Fighting wouldn't serve his interests. Emma nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. He asks about you constantly, about when he can come home to you, when our family will be together again. I don't know what to tell him anymore. For the first time in our 7-year relationship, Emma looked truly vulnerable. The confident, ambitious woman who had dismissed my culture as embarrassing had been replaced by someone who seemed lost and uncertain about her place in the world. The apartment is so small, she continued, though I hadn't asked. Tommy has to sleep on the couch because there's only one bedroom. David works 60-hour weeks to make ends meet, and I spend my days applying for jobs and getting rejected over and over. I remained silent, not out of cruelty, but because I sensed she needed to say these things more than I needed to hear them. I keep thinking about the house, Emma whispered, not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because it represented everything I thought I wanted: success, respect, the right kind of life. And now I realize that while I was chasing those things, I was destroying the most important things I actually had. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara. I was so afraid that Tommy would be different, that other people would see us as somehow less American, less successful. I thought if I could just control everything: the house, the neighborhood, the cultural influences, I could guarantee his happiness. The honesty in her voice was startling after months of legal battles and hostile confrontations. But he's not happy, she continued. He cries for you every night. He asks me why I made you go away, why our family is broken, why he can't write Chinese characters anymore. And I realized that in trying to protect him from being different, I took away the very things that made him special. I thought about Tommy's tears during our supervised visits, his confusion about why his family had fallen apart, his careful questions about whether the adults in his life would ever learn to love each other again. Emma, I said gently, what do you want from me? She took a shaky breath. I want to understand. I want to learn about your culture instead of fearing it. I want Tommy to be proud of his heritage instead of ashamed of it. And I want to figure out if there's any way to repair the damage I've caused. The admission hung between us like a bridge that might or might not hold our weight. I know I can't undo what I said at Tommy's party, she continued. I can't take back the months of dismissing your traditions and trying to minimize your role in his life. I can't fix the pain I caused by demanding that you leave your own house. She was right, those wounds couldn't be easily healed. But I was hearing something in her voice that I'd never heard before. Genuine remorse, not just regret about consequences. But I want to try, Emma said. If you're willing to teach me, I want to learn. If you're willing to forgive me, I want to earn that forgiveness. And if there's any way to give Tommy back the grandmother he's lost, I want to make that happen. I looked at this broken woman, standing before me, the same person who had publicly humiliated me, who had tried to erase my culture from my grandson's life, who had demanded that I leave my own property. But I also saw David's wife, Tommy's mother, and someone who was finally ready to confront the fear and pride that had driven her to such destructive choices. Learning takes time, I said finally, and trust, once broken, doesn't repair quickly. I know, Emma said. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness or for everything to go back to the way it was. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that I can change, that I can be the kind of mother and daughter-in-law that Tommy deserves. The second half of the concert was starting, and we could hear the children filing back onto the stage. Soon Tommy would be up there singing Christmas carols, looking out into the audience for the faces of the people who loved him. We should go back, I said. As we walked back toward the auditorium, Emma spoke once more, her voice barely audible. Grace, I'm sorry. for everything. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. The apology was simple, but complete. No excuses, no justifications, no attempts to share blame. Just acknowledgement of harm caused and responsibility accepted. It wasn't enough to heal everything that had been broken, but it was, perhaps, enough to begin. The handwritten letter arrived on a snowy January morning, slipped under my apartment door while I was having breakfast. Emma's familiar handwriting filled 3 pages of cream-colored stationery, each word carefully formed, as if she drafted this letter multiple times before finding the courage to deliver it. Dear Grace, I've been trying to write this letter for weeks, but every attempt felt inadequate. How do you apologize for trying to erase someone's culture? How do you ask forgiveness for treating family like an enemy? How do you rebuild a bridge you spent months systematically destroying? I don't know if these words can repair the damage I've caused, but I need you to understand that my cruelty came from fear, not malice. I was terrified that Tommy would struggle to fit in, that other children would see him as different, that my own inadequacy as a mother would be exposed if I couldn't control every aspect of his upbringing. I realize now how selfish and small-minded that fear was. In trying to protect Tommy from being different, I was trying to protect myself from the discomfort of not understanding his heritage. I was asking a 7-year-old to deny part of himself because I was too insecure to learn and grow. You have every right to reject this letter, to maintain the boundaries our conflict has created, to protect yourself from further hurt. But if you're willing to give me a chance, just one chance, I want to learn. I want to understand the culture I've spent so long fearing. I want to become the kind of mother who celebrates Tommy's heritage instead of hiding it. I've enrolled in Mandarin classes at the community college. I've been reading about Chinese history and traditions. I've visited the cultural center in Chinatown and asked about cooking classes and calligraphy workshops. I know these are small steps, probably inadequate, but they're sincere. Tommy misses you every day. He asks when our family will be whole again, when he can show you his schoolwork, when you'll teach him more Chinese songs. I don't have good answers for him because I'm the one who broke our family, and I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. If you're willing to guide me, I want to learn. I think it's possible, I said slowly, but it will require both of us to be different people than we were before. You'll need to genuinely respect my culture, not just tolerate it, and I'll need to trust you with my heart again, despite how badly it was broken. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I want to be worthy of that trust. I want Tommy to see his mother and grandmother working together instead of fighting each other. I want 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of 1247 Willowbrook Lane, watching Emma teach Tommy how to fold wontons, while she chatted with him in halting but enthusiastic Mandarin. The scene would have been impossible to imagine a year ago, but here we were 3 generations working together to prepare dinner for our first family celebration since the custody hearings ended. Nai, look, Tommy called out, holding up a lopsided dumpling. Mommy taught me how to make the edges pretty. Emma beamed with pride, her pronunciation still imperfect, but her effort undeniable. She'd been taking Mandarin classes for 8 months now, attending cultural workshops, and reading everything she could find about Chinese traditions. More importantly, she'd been asking questions, real questions born of curiosity rather than fear. The house looked different now, too. Emma had carefully replaced the items she'd once hidden away, adding Chinese artwork and cultural pieces with thoughtful consideration for how they fit with the family's overall aesthetic. The traditional screen that had caused our first landlord-tenant conflict now stood prominently in the entryway, surrounded by family photos that told the story of our blended heritage. David walked into the kitchen, carrying grocery bags, grinning at the domestic scene before him. How are my favorite cooks doing, Daddy? We're making enough dumplings for an army, Tommy announced. Nai says, that's good luck. Everything your Nai teaches you is good luck, David said, catching my eye with a grateful smile. The path to this moment hadn't been easy. After Emma's letter and our tentative dinner together, we'd spent months in family therapy, working through years of misunderstanding, hurt, and cultural conflict. There had been setbacks, moments when old patterns of fear and control resurged, times when trust felt too fragile to support the weight of our shared love for Tommy. But Emma had persisted in her efforts to understand my culture, and I had worked to trust her sincerity. Slowly, carefully, we'd built something new from the ruins of our broken relationship. The custody arrangements had been modified 3 months ago. Tommy now spent every weekend with me, plus Wednesday afternoons, for what Emma called cultural education time. But more importantly, I was welcome in their home again, not as a burden to be managed, but as a valued family member whose presence enriched rather than threatened their lives. Emma had found a new job with a medical device company, one that valued her sales experience and offered better work-life balance. David had been able to reduce his hours and spend more time with Tommy, and I had made the decision to sell most of my real estate portfolio, keeping only a few properties for income, while focusing my energy on what mattered most: family. Grace, Emma said, interrupting my reverie, could you check my technique? I want to make sure I'm sealing these properly. I moved to stand beside her, guiding her hands as she crimped the edges of a wonton. Her fingers were more confident now, but she still sought my approval, still wanted to learn the traditional way. Very good, I said. Your grandmother would be proud. Emma's smile was radiant. She'd asked me to start referring to my mother as Tommy's great-grandmother in our conversations, wanting him to understand the full line of women who had contributed to his heritage. I've been thinking, Emma said as we worked, about Chinese New Year next month. I'd like to host it here, if you think that's appropriate. I want Tommy to experience the full celebration with family and friends. The request touched me deeply. Chinese New Year had been the source of our first major conflict, when Emma had asked me to keep the celebration private. Now she wanted to host it herself, to share our traditions with others. I think that would be wonderful, I said. We could invite the whole community, Mrs. Wong, the Changs, everyone who helped me when I was starting out. I'd like that. I want Tommy to understand that he's part of a larger community, not just our small family. Tommy looked up from his dumpling making with interest. Can I invite my friends from school too? I want to show them the dragon dance. Of course, Emma said without hesitation. The more people who get to learn about our culture, the better. Our culture. The words that once would have made Emma uncomfortable now rolled naturally off her tongue. As we finished preparing dinner, I reflected on how much had changed since that devastating day at Tommy's birthday party. Emma's public humiliation of me had seemed like the end of our family, the final proof that cultural differences were insurmountable barriers to love and respect. Instead, it had become the beginning of something deeper and more authentic than what we'd had before. Emma had learned that embracing diversity within her own family made Tommy stronger, not weaker. She'd discovered that my traditions weren't threats to her authority, but gifts that enriched her son's understanding of himself and the world. I had learned that sometimes the people we love most need the biggest lessons, that patience and consequences can coexist, that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it does mean choosing to build something new from the pieces of what was broken. Tommy had learned that he didn't have to choose between being Chinese and American, that his heritage was something to celebrate rather than hide, that the adults in his life could work through their differences without making him feel torn between worlds. After dinner, as we sat in the living room drinking tea and watching Tommy practice his calligraphy, Emma made an announcement that surprised all of us. I've been thinking about going back to school, she said. There's a master's program in international business that focuses on Asian markets. I thought it might help me understand global perspectives better, maybe even open doors to work that involves China. David raised his eyebrows. That's a big commitment. Are you sure? Emma looked at me before answering. Grace helped me understand that learning about other cultures isn't just about being politically correct. It's about expanding your own world, becoming a more complete person. I want to model that for Tommy. I think it's a wonderful idea, I said, and I'd be happy to help with language practice and cultural context. As the evening wound down, and it came time for me to return to my own apartment, Tommy wrapped his arms around my waist for his goodnight hug. Nai, are you happy that our family is together again? More than all the stars in the sky, I told him, using our traditional phrase. Me too. I like it better when everyone loves each other. Emma walked me to the door, something that had become our new routine. Grace, she said quietly, I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for teaching me that love is stronger than fear, that family can survive even the worst mistakes. Thank you for being willing to learn, I replied, for choosing growth over pride, for choosing Tommy's happiness over your own comfort. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Willowbrook, I thought about the long journey that had brought us to this moment. The house that had once been a symbol of Emma's dreams, then a weapon in our conflict, had become the foundation for a new kind of family, one built on mutual respect, cultural celebration, and the understanding that love multiplies when shared rather than hoarded. Emma's old Asian ways were no longer embarrassing. They were treasured, honored, and woven into the fabric of Tommy's daily life. My grandson would grow up proud of all parts of his heritage, confident in his identity, surrounded by adults who celebrated rather than competed over his love. It had taken a crisis to teach us all these lessons, but perhaps that's how the most important learning happens, through struggle, consequence, and the choice to rebuild rather than retreat. Our family was whole again, but it was a different wholeness than before, stronger, more honest, more intentional, built on the understanding that respect isn't optional, that heritage is a gift, and that sometimes the people who challenge us most are the ones who teach us the most about ourselves. The moon was full that night as I looked out my apartment window, and I thought of Chenga, the moon goddess who watches over families separated by distance and time. She had witnessed our pain, our conflict, and our slow journey back to love. Tonight, she was witnessing our healing, our gratitude, and our hope for the future we would build together.